They're ready.
Okay, so let me just introduce the members of the committee, starting with Minister Dillon. Could you kindly introduce yourself? You could press the
David Lee, member of Parliament, Point of View.
Well, I'm Colin Burt, Chairman.
Franklin Khan, Vice Chairman.
Paula Gopi-School, member.
Daniel Solomon, Senator, member.
David Small, member.
Okay, and although we have seen you all before, could you kindly introduce yourselves again, starting with the Permanent Secretary?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here before you again. We promised last time that you had additional questions to ask of us, and we are here at your disposal. We did supply some information that you requested, and we hope that it satisfies at least some of the questions that were raised arising out of the last meeting. Let me start. I'll ask the members of my team to introduce themselves, starting on the left. I'm coming over.
Good morning, Chair. Members, Leroy Mears, Advisor to the Ministry.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. I am Monty Bihari, Director of Minerals.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Ivor Superville. I'm Acting Senior Energy Analyst.
Morning, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Heidi Wong, Deputy Permanent Secretary.
Morning, Chair, members and Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Frank Lukin, Advisor to the Ministry.
Good morning to all. Richard Jeremy, Chief Technical Officer of the Ministry.
Good morning, Chairman and members. I am Louise Poywing, Senior State Counsel.
So thank you, Chair. That's the team that I have with me this morning.
Have some others in the back there?
Yes, well, certainly they're in the gallery. They can introduce themselves as well.
All right. Something has just struck me when Mr. Superville, it is, who's in charge, Mr. Bihari is in charge of the Minerals Division. So we'll have a fourth session. Only on the Minerals Division. Okay? But the next session will be on oil and gas. So the fourth one will be on minerals. Okay. We got your responses to the questions. Thank you very much for your comprehensive replies. And I'm afraid to unleash Senator Small on you. But I think I will. Senator Small, could you open the button? You have any questions to put to the ministry?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Given that I had so much preparation for this role, I would also like to join with the chairman in congratulating the ministry on the fullness and completeness of our submission. As the ministry is the line agency for several entities, at least the ministry is setting the right tone by being fully compliant to the request of the Committee for Information. I hope that at some point in time that transcends to some of the entities under your purview. Mr. Permanent Secretary, I want to rush to your submission, and there are several issues inside of here that the committee members want to ask. But I want to deal with what I consider to be one of the major challenges in the sector, and that has to do with when I look at the numbers reported in particular for the past 5 years for exploration drilling, the footage. You provided quite comprehensive information on the footage. When you look at the period for 2015 to around 2010 going back, and then if you compare to the preceding period, there's been quite a drop-off in exploration drilling. And given the fact that where we are, we have a resource that the proven reserves are declining. I would like to understand, one, what may have accounted for the reduction in exploration footage drilling, and then what key initiatives that the ministry is engaging upon to get this done? Because if we don't have the exploration drilling to find new resources, then we will run into a serious problem, or probably an even more serious problem going forward. Could you assist with that information, please, Mr. PS?
Sure. And thanks for the question. Now, exploration drilling, and you zeroed in on a particular aspect of the work programs of the companies we engage under licenses and production sharing contracts. A lot of the drilling commitments are what are contained within minimum work program obligations in the respective licenses and PSCs. So that over a particular period, I think it was a 5-year period you had looked at, depending on the timing and phasing of the obligations, in large measure, the footage or the amount of exploration drilling undertaken by the various companies would be a reflection of what terms and conditions they have in their licenses. This is in the exploration phase. Now, in addition to that, over and above the minimum obligations, some companies, based on their outlook and their, would also have plans for exploration drilling. Some may, in fact, be moved to take advantage of having a rig in country and an exploration opportunity close to existing prospects being developed, etc. So that it's a combination of those things, but in large measure it's driven by the minimum work commitments, which will be contained in the separate licenses and PSCs. Now, several of these things would be, typically an exploration phase would be 6 years in the case of onshore and shallow water, and 9 years in the case of deep water. So that the phasing has to do with a comprehensive or an ordered exploration program, starting first with seismic, followed by drilling and evaluation of information and further drilling, etc. And success, of course, in terms of the discovery of new resources. So that's an outline in terms of what would guide or drive the fluctuation in the numbers as you described as over that period that we would have looked at.
Senator Small, before you continue, just let me come in here. Permanent Secretary, what struck us looking at the numbers, we were looking at exploration wells offshore. And if you look at the totals, let's say for 2006, the number is 5,622. I'm not sure if that is feet or meters. Is it feet or meters, by the way? I'm on page 15 of your response to us. And it is with respect to the exploration wells offshore in 2006, 5,622. Look at the bottom of the, is that feet or? Rig days. Okay, so it is rig days. So 5,622 rig days. And then if you go to 2007, it drops to 710. Then you go to 2008, 837. Then in 2009, drops down to 113. Then 2010, 87. And then 142, 268, 227, 270, etc. What struck us is prior to, say, 2007, 2008, you had fairly substantial rig days, and then it dropped down to almost nothing after that, and continued at a very low level, particularly between, say, 2009, 2010, and 2014. What went on there?
I could probably ask the Chief Technical Officer to give the details, but it's in sync with what I'm describing. 2006 would probably have been a year when there would have been a number of drilling programs executed, because that would have been the phase in the exploration program that several of the PSCs may have had their commitment.
I fully understand what you told Senator Small. That's not my point. I would hope as a country we would have a consistent sort of minimum number of rig days that we would like to achieve every year based on continuous dialogue and agreements with the companies. Why did we have a fairly constant high number and then drop off for about 8 years to nothing? What went on there?
From the statistics I have before me, Chair, if you go back to 2005, When you look at the figure for exploration wells offshore, I mean, that number is 365. The number kind of, it spiked in a sense in 2006. So that I'm suggesting may have been a reflection of a very intense program of drilling. Sometimes, and particularly for offshore drilling,
I'm sorry. Sorry, yes. A little icebreaker there. Go ahead.
I was moved to salute. But certainly, so what happens?
No, but hold on. You're telling us that to look at 2005 with 365. Okay, I'm looking at it. And you're saying there was a spike in 2006. Fine, I accept that. But then in 2007, 710, 837, and then all of a sudden, it drops down to 113 and doesn't really recover in any substantial way until, well, it doesn't. It stays down there. So what happened?
No, it's precisely what I was describing. So what happens typically with offshore drilling, and there's a practice where a company or a group of companies would bring a rig into country, so they'd be rig sharing. So to execute a number of the drilling programs, you would have this clustering of activity in and around the presence of a rig in country that can execute the separate programs. That is done in order to save on costs in terms of mobilization and demobilization of rigs, etc. So what would happen? You may, over that period, see a spike, and that, in my humble view, is a manifestation of an intensification of execution of the drilling aspect of work programs by a number of companies in that particular year, driven in part by, having a rig available that had the capacity and capability to execute.
Yes, but if you drill deeper into the numbers, you're seeing a number of companies doing no exploration whatsoever for many, many, many years at all.
Exploration is composed of a number of elements. Drilling is just one aspect. So if you zero in on drilling, and not only drilling, but exploration drilling, I think sometimes the numbers may be deceptive. It may move you to form an opinion that no activity or no exploration activity is taking place. But there are other forms of exploration, the seismic, the interpretation, etc.
All right, I think I'll put back Senator Small, but I think I'm probably in good company then with the rest of the world, because when the rig days drop in the United States, the price of oil goes up, as occurred just 2 days ago. So they also look at rig days as an important factor. But all right, we'll deal with that in the next meeting, Senator Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Mr. Permanent Secretary, I was going down, the intervention of the chairman is timely. I was going along the road of, does the ministry have a target to say, and it may not always be achievable, but on a rolling basis, does the ministry have a target to say that the target for the next 5 years is we'd like to have 200,000 feet of X amount of wells, and then from that target, now you roll back, you use that target to develop your activity, your bidding rounds, whatever you need to do. Because I believe that, I'm not sure if I understand how this happens. What is the structure of the planning process for this? The numbers are haphazard. When you look at the footage numbers in particular, it's skewed a lot of development drilling in some years and a lot of exploration drilling, and then I understand the explanation for that. My question here is, do we have a structured plan for exploration in the country that allows us to understand that the plan is that the ministry is saying we need to have X amount of wells drilled over the next 10 years, whatever the period is, and then out of that, we say, listen, in order to achieve that, these are the series of activities the ministry is going to engage in to make sure that we meet that target or we get close to that target.
And again, I just want to reemphasize that the metric being focused on of rig days or exploration, and again, offshore exploration rig days may be a deceptive metric. The ministry, the objective of exploration programs, and we have a philosophy of supporting and encouraging continuous exploration of our acreage and resources. That is achieved through having information and data that we put out in order to interest stakeholders in the prospectivity of particular pieces of acreage, inviting them to submit proposals on a competitive basis through the bid round process, sitting and executing contracts and licenses which have prescribed minimum work obligations, which would then lead to, in our view, a likelihood of finding additional resources. Okay, so what drives us really is having a process or a system in place which would continually invite and interest parties in going after and conducting exploration work in order to discover resources and prove up reserves, which will then feed into the hopper development, etc. So the disconnect with the metric that you have focused on is that in executing what may be a comprehensive work program, which is a 6-year work program, the drilling aspect of it may or may not fall early or late in that 6 years. And what we are looking at is an overlay of several contracts and licenses, so that from time to time, based on the obligations in the respective licenses and PSCs, companies, and based on their evaluation of data collected through seismic and other information available, the definition of a viable prospect, the planning that goes into prior to the execution of a well, all of that is a timeline that would then lead to eventually execution or the drilling of a well, which would manifest itself in footage. Now, we hope that that footage, in some instances, unfortunately, may be dry hole, because the expectation of finding is a risk expectation. So certainly, we also have to look at that in terms of what activities or what actions need to be taken in order to place ourselves in the best position to ultimately result in success. And our definition of success is not necessarily, now that's it's a collateral activity, and there's economic activity arising out of drilling, etc. But ultimately, the ministry will be looking at what is the best chance we have of finding additional resources and reserves, right, which then can be monetized to bring in revenue, etc., etc.
Mr. Chairman, if you permit me one last question in this round. Mr. Permanent Secretary, I accept that the metric of the footage drilled is a metric that may not necessarily yield what I'm looking for. I recall, probably I was in the system a little too. I recall we had done some work was done at a point in time that where we looked at the profile of the current production system to understand where the rate of decline was. And in order to establish what type of activity was required to maintain the level of production, there was an exercise done to say, listen, this is the production level now, this is where we forecast it to be. What needs to happen from a drilling basis? So that's how I came up with my drilling. So I didn't go all the way back. So I'm going all the way back now, that looking at where the current gas production is and what the forecast is, look at the current oil production and where the forecast is. What types of activity and how much of that activity is required to given the understanding that if you drill 5 wells, probably 1 or 2 may be successful, given the normal statistics. So this is where I was going with my question, that is that a type of analysis still in place, or is it, or I need to understand where we are with that?
And to answer your question, yes, it's something that is evaluated, but you would appreciate it's a mix of several things. There are several operators with different exploration appetites for risk in terms of their concept behind the particular plays, in terms of their access and their involvement or their working interest in any particular acreage that may or may not be more or less prospective. So certainly, when you look at what is required to achieve a certain risked result, we look at that and we believe that in having the companies under production sharing contracts, most of the new entrants in the offshore area, offshore gas area, under production sharing contracts. But there's the other element of existing suppliers like the BPs, etc., who have licenses. They have acreage, and there is no exploration program in the license to which they are committed by license to execute. So that is a conversation that has to take place in terms of, what do they have in their inventory? What is the sort of the prospectivity and their program in terms of investment, capital investment, in order to support drilling, exploration, drilling, and of course development as you go along. So it's a mix of those things. When we look at the target that we need, when we do the annual resource estimate, the independent evaluators, based on our rate of depletion, they would normally suggest that, look, we need to have a replacement of reserves target of 1 TCF a year, etc. And in order to achieve that, we say, okay, you would need to have a certain number of successful, not just wells, but wells targeting prospects of a particular potential. So it's a mix of a number of factors, and the drilling, the number of wells would fall out from that. But to focus only on the wells, is not what we do. We look at what is the likelihood and the sort of price at the end, what sort of numbers we could reasonably expect from a drilling program executed by the different operators that make up the mix in Trinidad and Tobago.
Right, let me come in here. Let's assume all things are equal, and the likelihood of finding oil is equal. And we know that because of our geology, there's a rapid decline in production. Soon after you start to bring a field into production, there's a rapid decline. And this was drawn home to me by the BHP field off of the East Coast, where I recall it started off at about 75,000 barrels a day. And now I think they're below 10,000 or somewhere around there. And I remember the former Prime Minister explaining our geology is like that you have high production at the beginning and then very rapidly decline to low levels. Since we all know this, and I'm sure Energy knows much more about this than I do, why wouldn't you have a targeted drilling program on an annual basis, since the only way you could increase production is by drilling? You can't do it any other way. I mean, the fact is that, yes, there'll be dry holes. Yes, in some areas you may not get any significant quantities of oil. We all know this. But the only way to increase production is either to improve the uplift from existing fields by secondary recovery methods or whatever, or you find new oil. So I would think you need to be focused on finding new oil. So why wouldn't you use drilling as a factor, increasing drilling as a target in order to ensure that our production goes up? I just want to know why.
And perhaps I convey the wrong impression that we do not look at drilling as one of the elements that
Mr. Lashley, how else can we find oil except by drilling? We could find it any other way?
No. I'm just trying to describe to you, Chair, that, so for instance, in evaluating proposals submitted by companies in response to our invitations for bidding, when we wait the sort of points allocation to different types of activity, it's evident that we place a high emphasis on the drilling of wells and footage, etc. So, that is one manifestation of the line of sight that we
but
have.
But you did say that you need to have a conversation now with the companies to tighten up that aspect of the contract, not so?
No. What I said is with respect to companies that do not have, they have gone past that part of their license, so they have acreage. So I do reference to one company who has significant acreage, but in terms of exploration obligations, their license is at a stage where there are no firm exploration obligations. So that then will involve.
But what do you do in a case like that?
In a case like that, what we do is we have an ongoing discussion and conversation.
That's what I'm saying.
So that is, but I'm singling that particular scenario, and I'm distinguishing it from the scenario where we invite new players.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, yes, actually, that is the key point. Because if you go back to your drilling, you opened on the assumption that the only exploration program that exists is the minimum work obligation for new licenses and or new PSC. No, you said that initially. Having said that, we are in a situation now where a significant portion of our prospective acreage as a country lies in the domain of 2 to 3 companies that are not bound by a minimum work obligation anymore. And if you check the statistics of offshore drilling for exploration wells, all these wells were drilled by Repsol, which was when they were trying to expand Puitik and Salmon, and by Petro-Canada and Canadian Superior, which was our North Coast block that they were working on. So your core companies, I don't want to call them by name, but you know who they are. They have gone past, and you rightfully said, their minimum work obligations, but they still sit on the prime acreage of the country. And as a country and as a ministry, you have to engage them now to come up with a robust exploration program, because they are on the productive acreage. And we have to do something about that. And because that is the issue here. The issue here is not giving a new PSC with somebody getting a new company to drill 2 exploration wells, because the chances of finding there is significantly smaller than in the productive acreage under the control of the 3 companies of which I speak.
And thank you for that. It's an accurate description. The strategy, because of the terms of the license, the mechanism for engaging the companies to pursue prospects is an iterative one. So their perspective is always one of they are competing for capital internationally. Certainly, we are of the view that we have viable prospectivity, and we wish these things to be developed. What we have done over the years is a number of changes or features in the licensing, and I want to add sub-licensing arrangements, which would encourage or facilitate activity taking place under the ambit of the head license, but certainly targeting prospects that may or may not be of priority to the particular companies or the entities that hold these licenses.
So actually, let me intervene here, because they've told me that as well, that they're competing for capital. So one of the largest companies would have activities, operations all over the world, and they have to compete in the company now as to where capital is invested. Well, that is all very well. That is their business model. It's fine for head of an oil company to say, look, we have operations in Africa, we have operations in the United States, in England, and in Trinidad, and we have to go and bid or compete to get an agreement from our head office to do exploration in Trinidad or production. They could say that. They're entitled to say that. But what are we doing as a country to deal with that? Because that is their perspective. That is not ours.
And I'm in agreement. And I recall on the last occasion we were here, There was concern, and rightly so, about the offering of incentives. Now, that, of course, is not something that the Ministry of Energy would do on its own. It will be done in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance and BRR, etc. And certainly, that is one of the requests that you would get from a number of companies suggesting that that is a mechanism to facilitate pursuit of what they describe as marginal prospects. Another approach, which is what I was attempting to describe, is where you could put a system in place or an arrangement which would facilitate the introduction or the involvement, as in the case of TSP and some of these other things, of other companies who have a different appetite for undertaking a particular activity that the head licensee would not. Petrotrin as well is one of the companies that would have acreage available, but perhaps not be in a position to pursue certain prospects immediately. So the sub-licensing, the farm-outs, that type of arrangement is one that can facilitate increased activity, drilling, which, as you quite rightly said, is the only way to prove up resources as we go forward.
All right. On that note, then, this will bring us back to, I think, what you're about to say. On page 6 of your response, you said you would commence stakeholder consultation in April. Well, we're in May. So?
Yes, I want to just to update is that we are late with that. Reason being, there were some different views in terms of how we proceed with the stakeholder discussions. We have landed on an approach now in terms of pursuing the consultations in smaller bites, maybe leaning on and learning from seeing how some of the other public consultations have been taking place in the public space. I won't call names, but or other ministries, but certainly dividing the stakeholder consultations into discrete areas where we engage a group of stakeholders, and then we can escalate that up into a national policy.
Right, discussion. So at our next meeting in 2 weeks, you'll tell us when the stakeholder consultations will begin.
Yes, definitely.
All right. I'll put you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I want to flag, for me, I have a note of concern. I am concerned when the Ministry of Energy apparently is advancing an argument that is not a Trinidad-centric argument. And I say that deliberately. I don't intend to be controversial, but I think that where we are, we have over 200,000 hectares of some of the most prospective acreage in the country. Me too now. Yeah, bad manners. Yeah. And where we in a situation, Mr. Chairman and members of the team from Ministry of Energy, where our natural gas industry is stagnant, our oil production is in steep decline. I think that some urgent action is required. And I understand that the contractual mechanism requires some engagement, but that engagement has to take respectfully a firmer tone, because we're in a situation where we are not able to grow our gas sector, and our oil sector is in a rapid decline, and we have assets that are very prospective. There needs to be a discussion around, the short version is, these are assets that are prospective. Could you give us your plan for activating these assets? And if your plan doesn't meet our requirements, then let's discuss a way in which we could get some other party in there to get our requirements met. We have to take it from the position of Trinidad and Tobago centric, and it doesn't mean that we are oblivious to the concerns or the issues of the operating entity. But at some point in time, we have to take the interest of our stakeholders, and that is my concern. And it's not something that I am beating up the ministry for. It is a concern that I hold as a professional in this industry, that where we are, we need to be in the same way as which these entities are very, very focused on delivering results for their stakeholders. They are laser focused on it. And when they come in the room, they don't want to move until they get their stakeholder requirements are met. All I'm saying is we should adopt a similar strategy. We have our stakeholder commitments. We have a situation where gas industry is stagnant, oil industry or oil sector is also in sharp decline, and we need some of these assets to be performing for us, not on your schedule, but rather on our schedule. So, Mr. Permanent Secretary, that is my entreaty to you and your team. I know it's not an easy ask, but I think you have a strong supporter in the chairman of this committee and all the members of this committee that this is something that we have to try to have a little firmer conversation.
Certainly, and I share your sentiments, and certainly the tenor, I may have sounded perhaps a tad diplomatic in terms of describing the engagement of the companies. But certainly when we approach the companies, it's very clear in terms of what the country requires, what are our needs, what we would like them to do. But certainly at the end of the day, I just want to remind you, we have a tradition of respect for licenses, contracts, etc. So the process we choose to adopt and engage in the companies is one of dialogue, being very clear, as you quite rightly pointed out, what we require, but certainly having that dialogue in order to achieve the objectives as you described.
And Mr. Permanent Secretary, I agree. I am supportive and I understand the dynamics, but I have also been in the room with companies under contract with firm, hard commitments to the government that are trying to make. I've come to the room and said, listen, we are not able to abide by these current terms, and we'd like to have a discussion with you to change these terms. I recall very well one very large company decided that they were not going to drill a certain amount of wells and opted to do some program with Petrotrin, and the ministry accepted that. So all I'm saying is when these companies have their issues and they want terms changed or adjusted, they come knocking, and they come knocking very hard, very, very hard, and are very clear about what they want. So that all I'm saying is, in your most diplomatic style, that I engage them with similar fervor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Small, I think you've beaten that horse. That horse is dead and buried. Minister.
This is not the question that I wanted to ask, but arising out of the last discussion by Mr. Small, I'm really concerned as to whether or not the ministry is well-resourced to handle what is required of them now. And then I'll move into my next question.
The question of resourcing in the ministry has come up quite frequently. In fact, at the last, I'm not too sure if it was before this committee, but we were describing a process that we are engaged in, and we have been engaged in for quite a while, in terms of the restructuring of the ministry. And by restructuring, really, it's really, in a sense, an increase in the capacity and capability of the ministry, and fine-tuning and sharpening the skills that are required in order to pursue some of these strategic items. That process has, in my view, been taking too long.
Far too long.
Yes, regrettably. It's unfortunately part of the process within the public service. We have adopted some interim measures to the extent we have the authority to do certain things. But certainly, ultimately, and I hope I can rely on the support of the committee to endorse the position that, in fact, strong support for bolstering the resources and increasing the capacity and capability of the ministry is something that is required and will be required as we go forward.
But I think that largely lies with the ministry, because there are several ways in which you can engage and obtain your resources. So I would say, yes, you need the support of the committee and government, but I think a lot relies on you and the ministry and the pace that you've been going at.
And yes, Minister, I take your point. And we have been, to the extent we have the authority to do so, we have been adopting measures in order to ensure that we continue to move forward. But the point I was making was that unless and until you have a longer term, more sustainable organization to support that activity, we'll be in a position of uncertainty. But I take your point, and we are focused on ensuring we have the resources. We have, in fact, retained some of the resources that we know can contribute and assist with some of the items that we have to pursue. But those are short-term measures. Ultimately, you want to have an organization that organically has that capacity to be able to treat with these matters on an ongoing basis.
The question which I originally wanted to ask had to do with a chart which you provided of fields that were not under production. And in it, you gave an indication of marginal fields under development. Page 36, that is, sorry. There was a schedule of proven pools of natural gas that are not under production, exclusive of cross-border fields. And the ministry's strategy to monetize will be the last column, and there are indications there, marginal field, need gas contract, etc. It's well known and in the public domain that there's a shortage of gas which is affecting the supply to many downstream operators and also to Atlantic as well. But I'm seeing in the column here, need gas contract under for several fields. Whose responsibility is that, and why it is that these gas contracts remain outstanding?
Just to start, to begin the answer to you, Minister, the issue of marginal fields, and I know it has been discussed in the national space quite vocally recently, because of the maturity and the complexity of our resource base here in Trinidad and Tobago. We are at a point now where the larger fields have been brought onto production, and what you're looking at is a pool of resources that are of smaller sizes, probably less attractive reservoir characteristics, that will require the application of technology, that will require operators with lower overheads, etc., in order to pursue. That discussion is one that we've actually been pursuing with stakeholders, and in fact there was a discussion quite recently at UTT where the two universities are actually the University of the West Indies and UTT had invited discussion on what is required, both from a technology standpoint as well as other measures, in order to facilitate pursuit of these marginal resources, these marginal fields. Again, engaging the stakeholders is one part of it, but certainly having the full benefit of the ideas and the approaches and techniques that could best result or redound to the success of pursuing these marginal resources, because these are resources that are found there. They are part of the reserve base. So certainly what you need is to have some sort of a system in place to facilitate going after them and bringing them onto production in the shortest possible time.
Yeah, I understand what you said, and I've seen the classification, marginal field under development, but there are those need gas contract. What's the next step for those that are classified need gas contract?
That is a manifestation of where we are right now in the cycle of contracts coming to an end and the discussions in terms of renewing or extending gas contracts. And that's something that the NGC is currently engaged in with several of the suppliers, existing suppliers. So that description, need gas contract, what that is saying is, unless and until there is a gas contract in place, which has been negotiated, and the terms and prices and volumes have been determined, the pursuit of these marginal discoveries or these fields would hinge on, in large measure, on the terms to be agreed for the volumes and the prices for gas to be supplied from these fields.
Through the chair, I'm looking at page 5 and 6 in relation to the rankings of Trinidad and Tobago. And I see on page 6 that you say Trinidad was ranked 39 out of 126 for 2015. And it's gone up every year. From 2012, it was 69 out of 147. 2013 is 53 out of 157. And 2014, 44 out of 156. And there's a chart that shows the ranking of Trinidad. I'm just wondering what is your target for 2016 and how these rankings, how some of these countries are above us, which you see Nigeria is above us and yet still United States is below us. I wonder if you could help us to explain that and what is your targets for increasing the ranking of Trinidad and Tobago.
I'll ask DPS Wong to say a few words on it, and Mr. Superville as well, who is our senior energy analyst. But the point you're making, I understand in terms of the objective of where we sit in the rankings and moving in the right direction is one that we would want to pursue.
One of the things, good morning again. We always try to see if we can become very competitive in the oil sector. And it requires, in fact, looking and reviewing at the fiscal regimes of several countries. When the comparisons or the surveys are done, it is normally against whatever fiscal regime exists at the countries at that particular point in time. We may not, other countries themselves are also doing a review and they themselves are making changes. We are not privy oftentimes to what other changes countries make. So when we ourselves do changes in the fiscal regime, the comparison will be done with the other countries. The chart that you see on page 5, in fact, the countries that are above Trinidad and Tobago are in a worse position because what this is saying as the government share per NPV is way above the estimated 80% that Trinidad achieves. So which would indicate, in fact, that these countries are severely yes, or worse off position than we are. Not as attractive as we are.
And fiscal is not the only criteria.
Actually, I wanted you to clarify that. I'm glad you've clarified it somewhat, but the more fiscally attractive a country is, the less money we get, not so? No, seriously, it's a serious question.
It's a serious question that you have raised, but I think one of the issues that we have always been, if we are to remain in the market, we must be competitive. We can always take the stance that we are trying to achieve the maximum revenue, but I'm not sure where it will place us competitively and if investments, in fact, will be attracted to the country. So it's always a...
But it's not something to be proud of, that you're fiscally attractive, because the more fiscally attractive you are, the less revenue you get as a country, not so?
To be, one of the things, no, I wouldn't like to make that statement, because one of the things that in seeking to get the country to grow, the sector to grow, you need investments coming in. And if the country is not fiscally attractive enough, you will not have the required investments coming in. So there's always that...
But then you
that balancing act that needs to be achieved.
But then we reach present day where they're writing off 100% of the capital investment in the first year and you get zero income, and they're carrying forward their losses and you get zero income next year and the year after that. So do you have a scientific approach to this? Is it a hit and miss approach, or is it that there's a particular point in the range of countries that you want to be? Are you scientific about your approach to this?
Morning, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, as we're talking about the incentives, just give me a few minutes to to explain the context, especially to the viewers, if you permit me.
As long as they don't go off topic.
No. I just want to put it in some kind of context.
I will stop you if you're going off topic.
No problem. All right. So basically, what we are facing here as a country are a number of issues. And this is the context in which these incentives will look at. So we have a situation where oil production, which plunged from 140,000 barrels per day in 2006 to 87,000 barrels per day in 2015.
And now 75,000.
Right. So we have a situation also where we have, according to the audit done by Ryder Scott, that we have our proven gas reserve have declined from 12.2 trillion cubic feet, or TCF, of gas to 11.5 TCF. And these reserves, according to Ryder Scott, for the last 12 years has fallen by 1 TCF per year. So it's critical, I just want to make a point here, it's critical that we should have systems in place to attract investment. We need to deal with the situation as it is. And in addition, I just want to continue the context. We have a situation whereby the infrastructure that we have are over 25 years.
You're going off topic now. The topic is, I'll let Minister Khan and Minister Gopiskun come in. The topic is, when you make your decisions as to the level of incentives that you would want to give oil and gas companies, are you scientific in the way you do this, or is it a knee-jerk reaction that the companies are not investing and therefore you need to give them more and more until they start to invest? Or do you have a model? Are you scientific in your approach? And just
let me just come in here because I think I have a pertinent point to make. The chairman is asking to be scientific, and he's right. The governing principle of taxation of our wasting asset is that the state must maximize economic rent. Because we are not producing oil just to say we're producing oil, because when the oil finish, it finish. When the gas finish, it finish. So in other words, if the state cannot extract economic rent from that asset that God has put here, it makes no sense producing it. That's point one. So there's a limit to where you could bring the incentivization, because when the graphs cross, it makes no sense. Secondly, when you give 100% write-off on an exploration well, PPT is 50%. Unemployment levy is 5%. What you are in fact doing, if the company is not tax liable, is the state is funding 55% of that well. Once you can write it off on your petroleum profit and your unemployment levy. So understand it is you are actually funding that well halfway. It almost comes like a joint venture between the state and the company. And I think the key error you all are making, if I should say that word guardedly, is what you classify as an exploration well. If you have a new production sharing contract where there is no production, you can afford to write off exploration because there is no revenue stream to write off until it comes into production. But what seems to be happening is that in known acreage, new field extensions and field extension, if they are categorized as exploration, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Because in some of those old E&P licenses, it's difficult to classify a field extension prospect as a new field wildcat. And I feel you have to make a further subdivision of your exploration wells to say, new field wildcat, granted, 100% write-off of exploration costs. But you should have a sliding scale now where those that fall in between cannot qualify for 100% write-off.
Minister Gopisco.
Right. So again, concerning the same treatment of trading losses, the way we've done it, arising out of the Income Tax Act, is without limitations. Whereas I recognize from the statements that you have given, there are a number of countries that allow the losses to be carried forward, but there's a limited period. For instance, 3 to 5 years. Or in the case of Chile, Germany, and Saudi Arabia, they limit the losses to the percentage that can be done in the first year and the percentage in the second year and so on. Why it is that we have driven ourselves to this extent where you can just do what you want for as long as possible, which is what it seems to me other countries are not doing that.
Let me ask Mr. Superville to address Minister Gopi Skoon's question in the first instance, and I would like to come back to Minister Khan's suggestion, which
And don't forget, I've asked you whether you use a scientific approach, and I'm not getting an answer.
Yeah.
All I'm getting is an overview of the industry, which we all know already. We don't need that.
So
okay?
I'll come back to your question as well, Chair.
Okay.
Minister, you're talking about, excuse me, you're talking about the third question and rationale for the incentive, is that?
Yes.
This decision, as you would see, was taken since by Finance Act 1988. That's some time ago. And the decision covers not only the petroleum sector, but also company tax and income tax. We look for the rationale, but basically, this is a decision taken by the Board of Inland Revenue as to why the why they made a decision to write off 100% going forward. We don't know why, but it's a decision taken by the Board of Inland
Mr.
Revenue.
Superville, since you don't know, and we are asking you, is it time now to revisit this? What do you think? Should we revisit this?
Well, given the situation, we could contemplate, or we could look at, instead of carrying 100% write-off, we could look at probably some of the other options that we have here, which is more or less, the first one would be like what it used to be before.
Yeah, but we need you to advise us, We're examining you. So we want you to recommend to us. See, you said this thing was put in place in 1988.
Yes.
That was a long time ago.
Yes.
Should we revisit this thing?
Chair, I would just like to say something. The 100%, the losses carried forward is under the Income Tax Act, Ministry of Finance. And it is one of those incentives that we, Ministry of Energy, has met. We have met that incentive there. And I think like all other fiscal incentives or measures that are taken from time to time, they can be reviewed and can be revisited. So there are periods of times when changes are needed. At one point in time, the losses carried forward, I think, was limited to 50%. And it was changed, I think, in 1988 by the Ministry of Finance. So we are guided by whatever policy decisions and changes will be emanating with respect.
I can assure you that no one around this table was in government in 1988. And therefore, that is not the policy of anybody around this table. So we are asking you, since we are now, how long is that now? Almost 30 years? 30 years later, and many, many governments later, does the Ministry of Energy feel that the government should revisit this policy of carrying forward trading losses indefinitely? Yeah. That's a simple question.
Chair, and again, I think at our last engagement, a similar question was asked in a broader sense in terms of whether we believe it's time to revisit, and yes, we fully agree. The mechanism that has been adopted in the past.
So since, Mr. Lee will come in just now. So since you agree,
yes,
at our next meeting, you'll give us firm recommendations.
But Chair, I just want to add that the mechanism has been one of collaborating with the agencies with responsibility.
You have 2 weeks.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know, on your document on page 2 and 3, I might be able to add some clarity in relationship with what was just discussed. The effect of the capital allowance, I think you gave an example on page 2 and 3 about a company that had no exploration expenditure in 2015, yet the impact of the increased capital allowance has resulted in a reduction of taxes of over 103 million. I don't know if you'd like to elaborate on this example.
This example was to give an illustration of the impact of the capital allowance with respect to the deferral of government revenue. This increase of capital allowance is not a loss to government with respect to revenue. It's a deferral of government revenue. What it affects is basically the timing of government revenue. It affects government cash flow. So this year, if you write off, like for instance, the 100% expiration, if you write off 100 this year, it means that next year the company will have that expenditure write-off in the following year. So therefore, they'll have higher tax in the following year. So the notion that this is, excuse me, the notion that this write-off is a loss to government is not correct.
Yeah.
Is not correct.
Next question.
So I'm getting taxes this year then?
Like I said, it's timing difference.
Well,
it affects your cash flow this year, but next year you could probably get double.
No, but if you can write off the whole amount in the first year, obviously that's more valuable. Obviously it's a loss. If we get more revenue this year than next year or the year after that, obviously there's a loss to the government. But let's not argue that point. The point is that this 100% capital allowance is there. It will obtain until 2017 unless it's changed. And we want to go forward now that we don't do that sort of thing again. Because I don't think it was appropriate. It was appropriate at the time, but it was not tied to the price of product at all. So that it was just in space, that we need to get people to come in, let's give them an incentive. It worked, but it worked in one way. They're coming in, we get no revenue. So it really hurts the country in terms of the bottom line. So we need to look at it again.
My next question, my other question, we talked earlier on about offshore drilling. I did not hear anything about onshore exploration bidding, and what is the status with that?
Yes, morning to all. In 2014, we have given out 3 land blocks with a total of 12 exploration wells committed. The companies are now in the first phase, I would say, in terms of their exploration process, in terms of carrying out geological and geophysical work. The exploration wells are expected to start drilling, if not later this year, in 2017, on land.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question relates to page 45 in terms of the backlog of the 385 audits. The question has to do with what measures are you putting in place to treat with those audits, bearing in mind that you also mentioned there's a recent increase in service providers, and this audit provides the assurance that the contractors are in fact in compliance.
On the last occasion, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it may have been raised in terms of, again, the capacity of the ministry to pursue and take care of its obligations in a timely fashion. One of the challenges we currently face is the structure and the size and capacity of the audit unit that has responsibility, so that there is a backlog of quarterly audits that need to be done. We have been addressing it, as I indicated, by some interim short-term measures, but ultimately the solution is an expanded capacity in a restructured PSC audit unit.
Well, let's go straight into that, Mr. Lashley.
Yes.
You have 11 people doing audits. You have a backlog of 385. How many people do you need, realistically, to make sure there isn't this huge backlog?
So you want to take it? Yeah. I'll let Ms. Wong speak to it in terms of our proposal,
Currently, we have proposal phase 1 of the restructuring plan that is before our current Minister of Energy. She's reviewing the proposal structure. And the audit, PSC audits, is one of the groups that has been given consideration under this first proposal. They have proposed at least an addition of two additional personnel to try and treat a proposal for 13 persons right now. Two, yes, sir.
I thought you were going to say 22.
No, well, let me. This is to handle the ongoing work. With respect to the backlog, we have been in discussion with PMCD, and they have indicated that the backlog should be addressed as a project, and that additional persons can be employed as service providers at this point in time to come in. But
do you have definite plans for this?
Yes.
Yes, we do, yes.
Certainly, Chair. And what I want to also indicate is, because of the resource constraints, we have prioritized the particular audits. Although they are required under the contract, there are some contracts that, yes, there is a need for the audits to be done with respect to costs, but some of these contracts are not yet in the productive phase. So there's not a fiscal.
So actually, let me ask a more general question. You say resource constraints, and I get the impression from everything that we've read and we're hearing that you are short-staffed. Now, I find that the two ministries that should not be short-staffed is my ministry and energy. And let's not go into why you're short-staffed. What we want to know is how much, what is the extent of your shortage or your resource constraints, and in which disciplines, and do you have a definite plan? Because I can assure you, I think I can speak for all members of this committee, we will support any increase in staffing at the Ministry of Energy that is required. So we need to know, right? So you know, one of the things I want to tell you, by the way, I will keep pushing until all secrets are revealed. We are not going to allow any secrets in this committee. So we want to know what are your staff constraints. Let this committee know, so we can see what you need, what you want, and we will, at the level of the Parliament, we will send the information to the relevant place to make sure you get your resources.
I welcome that support.
So for the next meeting, tell us what your resource constraints are, your staff shortages, what you need to deal with all of the issues the committee is bringing up.
Thank you very much, Chair.
I just wanted to, before anybody else comes in, I just wanted to say that at the next meeting, because I want to close off at 12:30, we're going to have an in-depth discussion on the revenue the government gets from Atlantic LNG. This committee needs to know. We need an explanation of Train 1, Train 2, Train 3, Train 4, how it works, how come you get revenue from one train and you don't get from another, and we need to demystify the LNG business in Trinidad and Tobago, because we've heard sometimes cargoes are sold and the government loses money on the cargoes. So we've been told, not by the government, but when some of the companies sell cargoes, when you net back, the expense of producing and selling the cargo is more than the value you get for the cargo itself, and we need to deal with this at whatever level we can. I mean, I know there are confidentiality issues, but we need to get as much information into the system as possible. So that is the major topic of discussion at the next meeting: gas production and LNG production, and the revenue the country gets from LNG. Yes?
No, just to add to that also, the market shifts for LNG and also the implications for revenue.
Mr. Solomon, you wanted to come in? Oh, okay. Okay, well, let me just, before Mr. Small comes in, I'll let you have the final bite. Could we go straight to page 40 of your document, please? That's the one that deals with the areas in which we are exporting our LNG. And I'm seeing that the majority of LNG produced in Trinidad and Tobago now goes to South America, followed by the Caribbean, then Europe, then the Middle East. Sorry, North America, followed by North America, then the Caribbean, then Europe, then the Middle East and Asia. But when we look at the changes in the destination from 2005 to 2015, what I don't understand, and I'd like you to explain to me, why are we increasing the sale of LNG in North America, where the prices are low, and why are we reducing the sale of LNG in Asia, where the prices are high? And that's one of the things we want to get into more detail on the next occasion. Could you tell us what's going on? Look at the table. Look at 2015. 2015, you have a deep red bar for North America, and it's gone up. It was systematically going down from 90%. Yeah, I know. They have to explain. Systematically gone down from 90% in 2005 down to just about 12% in 2014, and it's back up to 20% now in 2015. And then when I look at Asia, Asia is down to 3%, 2% or something. Can you explain what's going on there?
Right. I'll ask Mr. Jeremy to walk you through, well, those two items that you have identified.
From 2012, 13, going down, the fall off there is due to the committed gas. There's a committed gas contractually to sell to the Boston market. So you will see the fall off down to almost the contracted volumes. The 2 years before would have been cargoes being sent to facilitate cooling at terminals in the States, US, because when you divert cargoes away from the US, there are facilities that require LNG to cool the tanks at those facilities. So you'll see probably a few cargoes going to the US. But in 2013 and 14 numbers are more or less contracted. We are down to almost contracted volumes. In 2015, the increase, cargoes have gone to Mexico because Mexico has been included in that column there.
Mexico was not included before?
Yes, Mexico numbers are included.
Right, so I am looking at absolute numbers, and I'm seeing 90% in 2005 went to North America, including Mexico.
Right, yes.
And then that dropped down to about 12% in 2014, and it's back up to 20%. And that's what I want to know. Why? Why did it go back up? Is that a lucrative
I'll have to just
market?
confirm in some of those years, no cargoes were sent to Mexico.
No,
Partly
right.
because of pricing,
Yes.
and also a new terminal that came on
Mm-hmm.
that have facilitated the movement of cargoes back to Mexico now.
But is it beneficial to send our gas to Mexico, beneficial to Trinidad and Tobago? That's the question I'm asking.
But in terms of, I know of two cargoes where the prices were higher than the Henry Hub price.
Yeah, they might be higher than Henry Hub, but are they higher than the price we're getting in Europe, South America, and Asia?
Okay, yeah. Back to those, the prices in the Asia market in 2015 have fallen. What you're seeing is the movement by companies to move their cargoes to South America because of the shipping costs. You will get more value if you go to the South American, where you have a lower shipping cost to the South American market than to go to Asia.
From the company's perspective. I'm talking about from Trinidad and Tobago's perspective.
Well, from these companies, the LNG is marketed by companies that are external, meaning the marketing entities.
I know. But what are we doing about it? What I'm looking at is that we get revenue from LNG. What is our control mechanism in all of this? We just stand by and watch them, and they send it wherever they want and get whatever price they want. This is the topic we want to get into.
Yeah, because that is basically probably at the next sitting we can get into.
We need to get into that.
That is basically.
So we can understand what's going on. Okay? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a quick question for Mr. Permanent Secretary and probably Mr. Lookin. It has to do with the natural gas allocation policy in the country. I want to draw your attention to page 38 of your document. And this speaks to the export quantities of LNG over the period 2005 to 2015. I recall Mr. Looking in a previous session in this room indicated that the petrochemical industry has suffered curtailments as high as 20%. When I look at the data presented here, over the period, the 5-year period, 2006 to 2010, and if I compare that the period 2011 to 2015, there's only been a 4% reduction in Atlantic LNG's export quantities, which suggests to me that the gas curtailment at Atlantic LNG is much less than what happens with the petrochemicals. So that I want to find out from you whether, one, what is the status, what is the plan regarding allocation of gas in the country, and then two, am I wrong, am I interpreting this data incorrectly, where it suggests to me that Atlantic over the most recent 5 years, as opposed to the previous 5 years, has only recorded a 4% decline in export quantities, which suggests that it's more or less been getting all of its gas. So that and where we have a situation where we have petrochemical downstream apparently suffering much larger declines. So my question is around the gas allocation policy. Do we have one? And then why are we allowing this situation to continue where if there's pain, I believe pain should be applied evenly, given that the ministry is the authority. Yeah? Or so that's why we look to see the areas where we get the best revenue. I am not sure what the policy is currently or what the thinking is, but these numbers suggest to me that there's a disparity between the gas allocation to LNG as opposed to others.
First of all, I think there is no official policy on gas allocation. In about 2005, I think there was attempts to come in to bring a policy into effect, but there was no policy that was done in that regard. So what happens is a kind of an informal arrangement. The difficulty is that when NGC signed this contract with one of the major gas producers, that contract was in 2000 or 2001. And what happened is that when subsequent contracts were signed between the major gas producer and those entities, more favorable conditions applied. And therefore, in a sense, NGC suffered on a broad basis as to in terms of allocation or where gas was then considered as dedicated fields. What had happened in the NGC's case, at that point in time when the contract was signed, certain fields were dedicated to the performance of the contract, together with an open-ended that we can get gas from other fields, right? But as time went along and we started committing more gas to whether it's LNG, because you have to understand that in the case of NGC, overall, they were buying about 1.8 BCF of gas, but in some of the contracts, we would probably see a smaller amount, let's say 700 million cubic feet of gas. Each train of LNG is in the order of 450 to 500 million cubic feet of gas. So every time a new train was added, they had a much greater drain on what was the resource base or the reserves base of the country. And therefore, it got more and more difficult to kind of meet the requirements, especially in terms of dedication of fields that will supply gas to the NGC. And therefore, what happened was we had a situation whereby, in a sense, it was a question of the allocation of gas between the trains and to the downstream industries. But I think we need to provide the numbers that we would go back into the details as to what was the allocation as we went through the time.
Just a quick follow-on. What we would want to know is what is the current allocation, because even I feel we're in a different place 2016 to where we were 2015. So when you come on the next occasion, I'd like to know what's the current allocation to LNG, to Atlantic, and to also the methanol producing, urea producing, ammonia producing companies.
All right. Mr. Lukin. Okay. I'd like to close off shortly. You made a statement that there is no policy. So when you come next time, you'll tell us whether you think there should be a policy.
Well, I can tell you today, Chair, I believe there should be.
Right.
And certainly that's one of the things that the discussions...
I know, in another place. And I noticed Mr. Myers is over there, very quiet. So, maybe we'll hear from him next time. But when we're talking about Atlantic, I think the lawyer needs to talk to us too about the legal, within reason. I mean, I know, as I said, I know the confidentiality issues and other factors to consider, but we need to talk about our legal position as well in terms of how much revenue we can get out of the LNG industry. Are there any questions from members, or shall we close off now? Yes. So the secretary will write you to confirm everything that we have asked. That will be the next meeting, and then the fourth meeting will be all about quarrying. Okay? All right then.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
This has been a